Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is a friend of mine, Michael Desmarais. Michael is a highly respected estate litigation attorney in Silicon Valley. He received his JD from Hastings College of Law at the University of California in 1973. His honors included the Order of the Coif. He's a certified specialist in probate, estate planning, and trust law. And among his many distinctions, he's a past president of the Silicon Valley Bar Association and a fellow of the American College of Trust and Estate Council. Mike is also the author of the Litigation Tools chapter of the California Trust and Probate Litigation book published by the California Continuing Education for the Bar. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Oprah. I appreciate it.
Good. All right. Well, Mike and I are going to be talking about estate planning for second marriages. Now, I said Michael is an estate litigation attorney, so he has quite a bit of insight and background in this area from in the trenches. Before I get started, I want to give a little caveat or caution, and that is that anybody who's watching that has these issues should get independent legal counsel. Michael is a California attorney who principally works in lawsuits involving estates and trusts. Okay, let's get started. So, do second marriage questions come up frequently in your estate litigation practice?
Very frequently.
Okay.
Probably the single type of cases that come up the most often.
Okay, so if you're going to maybe throw a percentage onto it, what do you think, 75%?
Oh, not that much, but at least about 50% of the cases are cases involving second marriage situations.
Okay, but anyway, so problems grow out of these second marriage situations. So do all deaths of spouses in a second marriage do they result in litigation?
At times it seems like all the ones that come to me do, but
Okay.
Not all of them do. Probably a minority do, but it seems like there's far more of them today than there ever were before.
Okay.
But that primarily, I think, Mike, has to do with the fact that they're keeping our bodies alive longer than our minds. There are frequently more second marriages because there are more divorces. One spouse outlives the other quite frequently. They're often children by the prior marriage. And in large part, I think the children basically tend to look to their parents' money as being their inheritance, as opposed to their parents to do with as they please.
So I think that's supposed to come to me. It's not, it's what mom and dad, whatever they think that they should be doing with it.
I don't know that our children really think that carefully about what it is that they expect to have happened. It's just that our children today have been raised in a fairly affluent way by us, with a great deal of freedom. They clearly want to assert their rights at age 18, to do what they want to do, but they fully expect their parents to continue to supply them with the same standard of life that they had before they became 18.
Or some do. I mean, some people, of course, that's sort of an affluent family type of a situation. If mom and dad didn't have the money in the first place, I guess they couldn't expect to see it coming from them.
Well, actually, I think it crosses what you might call affluent lines. Some families that have a few $100,000 have children that think this way. Others that have millions of dollars don't think so. So it often crosses over that type of, let's say, seven-figure division.
Okay. What is the common factor for most litigation?
Well, in this estate litigation area, it has to do with the fact that when the surviving spouse remarries, the issue is usually, what am I going to do with my property when I pass away? I've got this second wife or second husband that I want to take care of for the rest of my life, but usually upon his or her death, I want to see that my property goes back to my children. Of course, this becomes even more complicated if you have children by both marriages. How do I provide for each of these children? And sometimes it depends upon the timing. By the time I remarried, had I already gone ahead and put my children through college and postgraduate school? How much do I feel I should continue to provide to them after my second spouse dies? And that kind of thing. So usually it has to do with when you get married, whether you have children by a prior marriage, and how old those children are.
Okay, so the kids It's sort of that they have children from the previous marriage is a big part of the whole thing, obviously, because they're the survivors and they're the ones that are going to be upset. But also the conflict between the surviving spouse and maybe the children of the deceased husband or wife.
I'd say it's the children. The issue is usually doesn't come up if there are no children.
Okay.
If there are distant relatives, it very seldom comes up. It's if they're children. In fact, I was watching an old episode of Gunsmoke last night. Remember
really?
Matt Dillon, James Arness?
Yeah.
And they had an interesting show. Now, keep in mind, this was filmed 50 years ago, in which the son, by the prior marriage, didn't want his father remarrying a Native American who who had saved his life, and he was grateful, and she was bringing him a great deal of happiness. And so, he tried to talk his father out of marrying this woman, and when that failed, he shot and killed his father, which, 50 years ago, you could say James Arness is looking at him thinking that's a terrible thing to do. But in today's day and age, there have been a lot of changes in the law in California. It's probably a pretty good sign of the child's willingness to engage in a form of self-help to ease the transition along.
Is this a form of justifiable homicide?
Well, we have temporary insanity these days. For goodness sake, look at all the people that are walking off on those grounds. And the son would get on the witness stand, and in the old days, in 1950s, Matt Dillon would expect him to be hung. But today, he can explain the reasons that were motivating him to do those things.
Okay. Are misunderstandings for second families more common with men or with women? But I guess I should say when the deceased was the man or the woman.
I'd like to use the word problems more than misunderstandings, although misunderstandings is part of it. I think the bigger problem comes up when the second marriage occurs with the husband.
Okay.
Men, for reasons that may escape some people, just can't seem to handle being alone as well as women can. And when their first wife has died or divorced, frequently if it's been a good marriage in many respects, they long for that, and they will tell their second wife / nurse one thing, because they obviously want to keep her happy, but they also want to keep their children involved in their life, so they'll tell them something that is a bit different. And then the children get one idea, the surviving spouse gets another idea. The one who knows the truth is, by the time the issue comes up, dead. And so a conflict will often result in there. But it doesn't always take that type of misunderstanding or perhaps misdirection on the part of the husband. I think that people often just have different ideas about what they have a right to expect or what they do expect from their husband or father, as the case may be.
Okay. All right. So now, well, how can a family avoid these problems?
I don't think you can avoid them. There's too much of human nature that goes into play here. There are tools, some of them have been in place since 1982, that theoretically enable people to provide for their surviving spouse through a form of a trust. It can also be done pursuant to a will, although trusts are far more common these days. And then when the surviving spouse passes away, the balance can go on to the benefit of the children. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in short order, so I'll basically not get into the details of it, but there are different ways you try to provide for the spouse, and then when the spouse dies, it goes to the children by the prior marriage. You also try to identify what property is my separate property from my prior marriage, what property is our community property, keeping in mind that the surviving spouse, generally speaking, does not have any control over the deceased spouse, the one who's died, doesn't have any control over the surviving spouse's separate property or her interest in the community property.
Yeah, okay. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what, since we have brought up property, what is community property as opposed to separate property?